I couldn't believe my eyes when I looked out the window that afternoon. A woman in a bright green tracksuit was standing in my driveway, yelling into her phone and gesturing wildly toward a tow truck idling nearby. The tow truck driver looked confused, almost as if he wasn't sure whether to proceed or not. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. This stranger was trying to tow my car right out of my driveway. At first, I thought it must be a mistake. Surely, no one in their right mind would just show up and claim someone else's car. But as I stepped outside to confront her, the situation escalated far beyond what I could have imagined. "Excuse me," I called, keeping my tone firm but polite. "What do you think you're doing?" She turned to me, her face set in a smirk that immediately sent a chill down my spine. "Oh, there you are," she said, as if I were the intruder. "This car is parked illegally, and I'm having it removed." I glanced at my car, a pristine, cherry-red 1972 Chevy Chevelle that I had spent years restoring. It was parked neatly in my own driveway, not blocking anything, and certainly not breaking any laws. "Illegally?" I repeated, my voice rising. "This is my driveway, and that's my car." She rolled her eyes like I was some sort of idiot. "Actually, this is a shared driveway," she said, pointing toward the narrow strip of concrete that led from the street to my garage. "And your car is in violation of HOA regulations." I froze for a moment, trying to process what she had just said. This wasn't a shared driveway. It was clearly outlined in the property survey when I bought the house that this entire driveway belonged to me. And as for the HOA, they had no jurisdiction here. I wasn't even part of their neighborhood association. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my composure. "I don't know who you are or where you're getting this information, but you can't just tow someone's car because you feel like it." "Oh, I can," she shot back, crossing her arms. "And I will. You see, you've been causing problems for the entire neighborhood. That car of yours is too loud, too old, and frankly, it's an eyesore. We're trying to keep this area respectable." I could feel my blood boiling now. It wasn't just the ridiculousness of her claim. It was the sheer arrogance in her tone, as if she genuinely believed she had the right to dictate what I could or couldn't do on my own property. "This car is none of your business," I said sharply. "Now, I suggest you leave before I call the police." She let out a laugh, a high-pitched, mocking sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, please, call them. I'd love to explain to the cops how your car is violating HOA rules." I glanced at the tow truck driver, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "And you," I said, addressing him directly, "you know this is illegal, right? You can't tow a car without the owner's consent, especially not from private property." The driver hesitated, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. "Look, lady," he said to the woman, "I don't want any trouble. Are you sure this is okay?" "It's fine," she snapped, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "I already called the HOA president, and they approved it. Just do your job." I took a deep breath, my mind racing. This wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about standing my ground against someone who thought they could walk all over me. "The HOA doesn't own this property," I said, stepping between her and the car. "And if you so much as touch this vehicle, I'll make sure you regret it." For a moment, we were at a standstill. Her eyes narrowed, and I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to decide whether to back down or push forward. Finally, she jabbed a finger in my direction. "You'll regret this," she hissed before storming off toward the street. The tow truck driver mumbled an apology before following her, and I stood there, heart pounding, watching as they drove away. But as much as I wanted to believe that was the end of it, I knew better. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The uneasy calm didn't last long. The next morning, I woke up to find a note taped to my front door. It was written on HOA letterhead, but the wording was suspiciously vague. "This is your final notice to remove the vehicle from the driveway. Failure to comply will result in further action being taken." There was no signature, no contact information, just the HOA logo slapped at the top. I wasn't even part of the HOA, and I knew for a fact that their jurisdiction ended several houses down the street. It was clearly another stunt from Tracksuit Karen, as I had started calling her in my head. But instead of intimidating me, the note only made me more determined to fight back. I wasn't about to let her bully me out of my own rights. Later that afternoon, I spotted her lurking across the street, her arms folded as she watched my driveway like a hawk. She didn't even try to hide it. Every time I stepped outside, her piercing glare followed me, and it was clear she was waiting for an opportunity to strike again. I decided it was time to gather some evidence. If she was going to escalate things, I needed to be ready. I installed a security camera above my garage door, positioning it so it had a clear view of the driveway. The next time she tried anything, I'd have proof. As the week went on, the harassment continued. I found another note on my windshield, this time threatening fines if I didn't move the car within 48 hours. It was laughable, really, because there was no legal basis for any of it. Still, the relentless notes and her constant surveillance were starting to wear on me. Then, one evening, things took a darker turn. I was sitting in my living room, enjoying a quiet night, when I heard a strange noise outside. It was faint at first, a soft metallic clink, like someone fiddling with something. My heart raced as I crept toward the window and peeked outside. There she was, crouched by my car, holding a pair of bolt cutters. I grabbed my phone and bolted outside, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Hey!" I shouted, startling her. "What do you think you're doing?" She jumped to her feet, the bolt cutters dangling in her hand like a smoking gun. "Oh, this," she said, trying to play it off. "I was just checking something, making sure your car isn't leaking oil all over the driveway." "You were trying to cut the lock on my wheel clamp," I snapped, pointing to the device I'd installed earlier that week as an extra precaution. "And guess what? It's all on camera." Her face turned bright red, and for a moment, she looked genuinely panicked. But then, like flipping a switch, she straightened up and crossed her arms. "Go ahead," she said smugly. "Call the police. I'd love to see what they have to say about your illegal modifications." I stared at her, barely able to contain my disbelief. The sheer audacity of her behavior was almost comical. "Illegal?" I repeated. "Lady, you don't even know the law." "I know enough," she shot back. "And I know the HOA has rules against these kinds of vehicles. You're the one in the wrong here. This isn't HOA property." I shouted, my patience wearing thin. "You have no authority here, and neither does your precious HOA." She didn't have a response to that, but instead of backing down, she just sneered at me. "We'll see about that," she said before storming off into the night. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the police, showing them the footage of her tampering with my car. They assured me they'd look into it, but I could tell they weren't exactly taking the matter seriously. It was just another case of a nosy neighbor causing trouble, and they probably had bigger things to deal with. But I wasn't about to sit back and wait for her to strike again. I reinforced the security system, adding another camera to cover the street view, and even installed motion-activated floodlights around the driveway. If she thought she could keep pushing me, she was in for a rude awakening. What I didn't realize was just how far she was willing to go. A few days later, I woke up to find something far worse than just another note. My car, my beautiful 1972 Chevy Chevelle, had been vandalized. Deep scratches ran along the driver's side door, jagged and deliberate, as if someone had taken a key and carved it out of pure spite. My stomach dropped as I stood there, staring at the damage. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She had done this. I reviewed the security footage immediately, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the feed. Sure enough, there she was, sneaking onto my driveway in the dead of night, her tracksuit unmistakable even in the grainy footage. She walked up to the car, pulled something from her pocket, and went to work on the door. The rage on her face was palpable, even through the lens. I called the police again, this time with the footage as evidence. The officer who came to my house seemed a little more interested now that I had something concrete. "We'll open a case for vandalism," he said, jotting down notes. "But do you have any idea why she's targeting you specifically?" "Because she thinks she runs the neighborhood," I replied bitterly. "She's been harassing me ever since I parked this car in my driveway. And now she's crossed the line." The officer nodded, but his expression told me he'd seen cases like this before. Petty disputes blown way out of proportion. "We'll contact her and let her know this is being taken seriously. Hopefully, that'll put an end to it." I wasn't holding my breath. Karen didn't strike me as the type to back down just because the police told her to. If anything, I suspected it would only make her angrier. And I was right. The very next day, I received a notice in the mail, an official-looking letter with the HOA's logo at the top. According to the letter, I was being fined $500 for violations of neighborhood aesthetic standards, specifically for parking an unapproved vehicle on the premises. It was absurd, of course, but it didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind it. Karen must have gone to the HOA and spun some story about how my car was ruining the neighborhood. Fuming, I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't just going to sit back and let her walk all over me anymore. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one. First, I filed an appeal with the HOA, attaching a copy of the property survey and legal documents proving that my driveway was not under their jurisdiction. I made sure to include a strongly worded statement about harassment and false claims, pointing out that the car was legally registered and met all local ordinances. I didn't know if it would make a difference, but I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't going to be bullied. Next, I started reaching out to my neighbors. Karen might have been loud, but that didn't mean she spoke for everyone. I wanted to know if anyone else had dealt with her antics, or if she had a history of causing trouble. To my surprise, almost everyone I spoke to had a story about Karen. She complained about lawn decorations, accused kids of playing too loudly, and even tried to get someone fined for painting their house a shade of blue she didn't like. She thinks she owns the place, one neighbor told me, rolling his eyes. But honestly, most of us just ignore her. She's all bark and no bite. Well, she keyed my car, I replied grimly, and now she's trying to use the HOA to fine me. His expression darkened. That's crossing the line. By the end of the week, I had a small but vocal group of neighbors willing to back me up. It felt good to know I wasn't alone in this fight, but I also knew Karen wasn't going to go down without a fight of her own. Sure enough, she struck again a few nights later. This time, she called a tow truck to my house while I was out running errands. Luckily, my new security system sent me an alert as soon as the motion sensors detected activity in the driveway. I pulled up the live feed on my phone and saw Karen standing there with the tow truck driver, pointing at my car like she owned it. I hit the record button on the app and dialed the police as I sped home, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. There's someone trying to illegally tow my car from my driveway, I said, giving them my address. I've got it all on camera. By the time I got home, the police were already there. Karen was in the middle of a heated argument with the tow truck driver, who seemed to be having second thoughts about the whole ordeal. I told you this isn't legal, he was saying. You need a signed order to tow a vehicle, and this guy clearly owns the property. Karen turned to the officer with a look of righteous indignation. He's lying, she shouted. This car is in violation of HOA regulations, and I'm authorized to have it removed. The officer raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, this isn't HOA property, he said, holding up the documents I'd given him earlier. This is private property, and you have no authority here. Her face turned a deep shade of red as she struggled to come up with a response. Finally, she blurted out, well, it's an eyesore. He shouldn't even have a car like that in a nice neighborhood like this. I couldn't help but laugh at the sheer absurdity of her argument. That's not how the law works, I said, crossing my arms. And now, thanks to you, I have plenty of evidence for a harassment case. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. For the first time since this whole mess started, she looked genuinely defeated. I thought that might be the end of it. With the police involved and Karen caught red-handed, surely she would think twice before trying anything else. But I underestimated just how stubborn she was and how far she was willing to go. 2 nights later, I was jolted awake by the blaring of my car alarm. Heart pounding, I grabbed my phone and checked the live security feed. What I saw made my blood run cold. Karen was back. This time, she wasn't alone. 2 men stood with her in the driveway, both wearing dark clothing and carrying what looked like crowbars. I could see Karen gesturing toward my car, her voice muffled by the camera's distance, but her intent was clear. She wasn't just here to cause trouble. She was here to destroy my car. I dialed 911 immediately, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. There's someone in my driveway trying to vandalize my car, I said. They're armed, and I'm worried they might escalate. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, but it felt like an eternity before I heard the distant wail of sirens. In the meantime, I watched helplessly as one of the men swung his crowbar toward the car, aiming for the windshield. My heart sank as the glass cracked, spiderwebbing under the force of the blow. Then, something incredible happened. The motion-activated floodlights I'd installed kicked on, bathing the entire driveway in bright white light. The men froze, shielding their eyes, and Karen let out a startled yelp. "Let's go!" one of them hissed, clearly spooked by the sudden illumination. But Karen wasn't ready to give up just yet. "Keep going," she barked. "We're almost done." Before they could do any more damage, the police arrived. 2 squad cars screeched to a halt in front of my house, their lights flashing. The men dropped their crowbars and bolted, but Karen wasn't as quick. One of the officers caught her as she tried to make a run for it, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her back toward the squad car. "What's going on here?" the officer demanded, his voice firm. "This is my property." Karen shrieked, her face twisted in fury. "He's the one breaking the law. That car is a nuisance, and I was just trying to fix the problem." The officer didn't look impressed. "You were trying to fix the problem with a crowbar?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's called vandalism, ma'am." "It's not vandalism if it's illegal to begin with," she snapped. "The HOA." The officer held up a hand, cutting her off. "We've already been through this. This is an HOA property, and you have no authority here. You're under arrest for trespassing, vandalism, and attempted destruction of private property." Her defiance faltered for a moment, and I could see the fear creeping into her expression. "You can't do this," she protested as the officer cuffed her hands behind her back. "I was just trying to help the neighborhood." The officers didn't respond. They loaded her into the squad car and took statements from me and a few neighbors who had come outside to see what the commotion was about. One of them, an older man who lived 2 houses down, shook his head in disbelief as he watched the scene unfold. "She's finally getting what she deserves," he said. "She's been a pain in everyone's neck for years." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Let's hope this is the last we hear from her. But the story wasn't over yet. The next morning, I received a call from the investigating officer handling the case. "We've identified the 2 men who were with her last night," he said. "It turns out they were hired by her. She offered them cash to remove your car from the driveway." The audacity of it all left me speechless. "So she wasn't just harassing me," I said slowly. "She was actively plotting to destroy my property." "That's what it looks like," the officer replied. "The good news is, with the evidence you provided, the security footage, the vandalism report, and now this, we've got a solid case against her." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a sense of vindication. Karen had pushed me to my limits, but in the end, her arrogance had been her downfall. She had underestimated not only me but the law itself. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood buzzed with talk of her arrest. It turned out that Karen's reign of terror had extended far beyond just me. Dozens of neighbors came forward with stories of her outrageous behavior, falsified complaints, threats, and even small acts of vandalism. It was like a dam had broken, and everyone was finally free to speak up. The HOA, eager to distance itself from her, issued an official apology and clarified that she had acted entirely on her own. They even offered to cover the costs of the damages to my car, though I suspected it was more about saving face than genuine remorse. As for Karen, she was charged with multiple counts of vandalism, trespassing, and harassment. When the case went to court, the judge didn't hold back. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail and ordered to pay restitution for the damages she had caused, not just to me but to several other neighbors as well. After Karen's sentencing, the neighborhood felt different, quieter, calmer, almost as if a storm had finally passed. For the first time in months, I could step outside without feeling her watchful, judgmental eyes on me. My car, once a symbol of her anger and entitlement, sat proudly in my driveway, fully repaired and gleaming under the sun. The restitution money from Karen and the HOA had covered not only the damages to the Chevelle, but also the cost of upgrading my security system even further. It felt good to know that my hard work on the car hadn't been in vain, and now, every time I drove it, I felt a sense of triumph. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was proof that I could stand up for myself and win. Word about Karen's antics spread quickly through the community. At first, I worried that the attention might paint me as the guy who had caused all the drama, but the opposite happened. Neighbors I barely knew started coming up to me to share their own stories about Karen and thank me for standing up to her. Honestly, we've been dealing with her nonsense for years, one neighbor said, shaking his head. It's about time someone put her in her place. It turned out Karen's influence over the neighborhood was more of a facade than anything else. She'd bullied people into compliance for so long that no one had dared to question her authority. But once I had taken a stand, it was like the entire community realized they didn't have to put up with her anymore. A few weeks later, the HOA invited me to their next meeting, not as a member, of course, but as a guest. They wanted to formally apologize for their mishandling of the situation and assure me that steps were being taken to prevent anything like this from happening again. I was skeptical at first, but when I walked into the meeting and saw the stack of papers on the president's desk, complaints filed against Karen over the years, I realized they were serious. During the meeting, one of the board members stood up and said, "We've come to understand that our lack of action against her behavior enabled this situation to escalate. For that, we're truly sorry." It wasn't much, but it felt like a small victory. Knowing that Karen's actions were finally being acknowledged, and that the HOA was being held accountable for their negligence, was enough for me. As for Karen, her 6-month jail sentence turned into the talk of the town. Rumors swirled about how she was handling life behind bars, and while I didn't take joy in her downfall, I couldn't help but feel relieved knowing she wouldn't be back anytime soon. By the time she was released, she had put her house up for sale and moved out of the neighborhood entirely. In her absence, the neighborhood began to thrive. People seemed friendlier, more willing to chat and lend a hand. A few of my neighbors even joined me in organizing a monthly community barbecue, something that had apparently been impossible when Karen was around. It was amazing to see how quickly the atmosphere changed once her toxic influence was gone. One evening, as I sat on my porch with a cold drink in hand, I watched the sunset reflect off the glossy red paint of my Chevelle. It was a peaceful moment, one I'd fought hard to reclaim, and it made everything I'd been through feel worth it. This whole ordeal had taught me a lot. Not just about standing up to bullies, but about the strength of community and the importance of boundaries. Karen had tried to take control of my life, my property, and even my sense of peace. But in the end, all she had done was reveal her own insecurities and weaknesses. I didn't need to stoop to her level to win. All I needed was persistence, a little support, and the courage to stand my ground. As I leaned back in my chair, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me, not just for the resolution of the conflict, but for the lessons it had taught me. Life, much like a classic car, requires care, patience, and the occasional bit of polishing to keep it running smoothly. And just like my Chevelle, I knew I'd come out of this a little stronger, a little more resilient, and ready for whatever came next. I never thought a simple driveway would turn into the battleground for one of the most frustrating, ridiculous fights of my life. It started with small signs, footprints where there shouldn't have been any, a car parked just a little too close to the edge, and then a bold, entitled claim that left me reeling. My neighbor, Mr. Peterson, a man with an inflated sense of authority and a talent for weaving nonsense into legal threats, decided that my driveway wasn't actually mine. According to him, it was community property, a shared space that anyone in the neighborhood should be free to use at their will. I had lived in this house for years without a single issue, but suddenly, I was being told that the very ground leading up to my garage no longer belonged to me. At first, I thought it was a joke, one of those absurd statements made in passing that people laugh off. But then, things escalated fast. One morning, I stepped outside to find a car I didn't recognize parked right in the middle of my driveway, blocking my garage completely. I knocked on Peterson's door, hoping for a rational conversation, but the smug look on his face when he answered told me everything I needed to know. "Oh, that's just my cousin's car," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "He'll be back in a few hours." No big deal, right? It was a big deal. I made it clear that he needed to move the car immediately, but he just smirked, crossing his arms as if daring me to do something about it. This isn't just your driveway, you know. It's been open for years. People have used it before. Just because you live here doesn't mean you get to hoard all the space. My blood boiled at his audacity. This was my property. The deed, the title, everything had my name on it. And yet, he spoke with such entitlement, as if my ownership was just a technicality he could dismiss. I called a tow truck. If he wasn't going to move the car, I'd have it removed myself. But before the driver could even hook the car up, Peterson stormed outside, shouting about how I had no right to tow community property. He actually tried to physically block the tow truck, arms spread wide like some sort of martyr for the neighborhood's so-called rights. The tow truck driver looked at me, waiting for a call, and I knew I had to act fast. This is private property, I stated firmly, shoving the paperwork in Peterson's face. Your cousin's car is trespassing, and I'm well within my rights to have it removed. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Hesitation, doubt, but it was gone in an instant. He turned to the tow driver and threatened to sue if he touched the car. The driver, not wanting to deal with legal drama, backed off, leaving me fuming while Peterson strutted back into his house, victorious. That was when I realized this wasn't just a one-time thing. It was the beginning of something bigger. Within days, more cars started appearing in my driveway. Random people, visitors I'd never seen before, parking there like it was a free-for-all. Peterson had apparently spread the word that my driveway was fair game. I confronted him again, only for him to double down, claiming he had spoken to someone at the city office who supposedly confirmed that shared use of excess driveway space was encouraged in community neighborhoods. It was, of course, a complete lie, but that didn't stop him from parading it around like a legal decree. I was beyond frustrated, but I wasn't going to let this stand. It was time to push back, hard. I refused to let Peterson get away with this blatant attempt to hijack my property, but my initial complaints to the city yielded nothing. Bureaucracy moved at a snail's pace, and even though I had legal documents proving ownership, the process of filing a formal complaint would take weeks. Meanwhile, my driveway was turning into a public parking lot. Strangers loitered near my garage, their cars left for hours at a time, some even overnight. It was infuriating. Every morning, I'd wake up to find new vehicles lined up as if my property was some free community service, and each attempt to confront Peterson was met with smugness, deflection, or outright laughter. He was enjoying this, reveling in the chaos he had created, and I knew he wasn't going to stop unless I forced him to. My patience wore thin when I stepped outside one afternoon and found a group of teenagers using my driveway to skateboard, their wheels scraping loudly against the pavement. When I asked them who gave them permission to be there, they just shrugged and said Peterson told them it was fine. That was the last straw. I started documenting everything, taking photos and videos of every unauthorized car, every person who trespassed onto my property, every instance of Peterson's absurd entitlement. I researched property laws, looking for any angle I could use to shut him down quickly. Then, I put up signs, large, bright ones that made it unmistakably clear that my driveway was private property and that unauthorized vehicles would be towed at the owner's expense. I even installed security cameras, their blinking red lights, a warning to anyone thinking of testing my patience. But Peterson wasn't fazed. He laughed off my attempts to reclaim control, telling anyone who would listen that I was being unreasonable, that I was some selfish neighbor trying to hoard space. The worst part was that a handful of people actually believed him. Some neighbors who had never cared before suddenly started making snide comments about how I should be more community-minded. It was surreal. My own property was being used against me in the court of public opinion, and Peterson was the self-appointed judge, jury, and executioner. Then came the fake notices. One morning, taped to my garage door, I found an official-looking paper claiming that excess residential driveway space was subject to community use unless explicitly designated otherwise through a petition signed by local residents. It was complete nonsense. No legal basis, no actual city approval, but it was written in the kind of bureaucratic jargon that could easily fool someone unfamiliar with property law. And that was precisely what Peterson wanted. He wanted me to feel like I was the one in the wrong, like I had no choice but to comply with his ridiculous demands. I could have gone straight to the police, But I knew that even if I managed to prove he was behind the fake notices, the process of dealing with it legally would take weeks, maybe even months. I needed something faster, something that would stop him in his tracks before he dug in even further. That's when I decided to fight back with his own tactics. If Peterson wanted to manipulate perception, I'd make sure everyone saw him for what he truly was, a liar and a fraud. I took the fake notice to the city office myself, not just to report it, but to get an official statement confirming that no such policy existed. I then printed copies of their response and posted them all over the neighborhood. I sent emails to our local community group, exposing Peterson's scam and making it crystal clear that he had zero authority over my property. But I didn't stop there. I started calling tow companies, not just one, but several, making sure I had services on standby for when I made my next move. I installed a retractable parking barrier at the base of my driveway, one that required a remote control to lower, cutting off access unless I personally allowed it. And then, the moment the next unauthorized car parked there, I made my move. I wasted no time calling for a tow, watching with satisfaction as the truck pulled up and hooked onto the vehicle without hesitation. Peterson came rushing out, fuming, demanding that the driver stop. But this time, I wasn't alone. Several neighbors had seen my notices, seen the proof of his lies, and they were watching. Some whispered among themselves, others simply observed, but the pressure was there. And when Peterson tried to pull the same legal bluff, claiming I had no right to tow cars from shared property, I didn't even need to respond. One of the other neighbors, someone who had been on the fence about the whole situation, finally spoke up and shut him down. "Cut it out, Peterson. You made all of that up. We all saw the real notice." The tow truck driver didn't even acknowledge his protests as he drove off with the car in tow. It was a small victory, but I knew Peterson wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning of something bigger, and I was ready for the next move. Peterson's rage was evident in the way he stomped back to his house, slamming his door so hard the windows rattled. I knew this wasn't over. He thrived on control, on manipulating people into giving in to his ridiculous whims, and I had just delivered a public humiliation he wasn't going to forgive. For the next few days, there was an eerie silence. No random cars appeared in my driveway, no teenagers loitering outside my garage, no new fabricated notices pasted to my door. But I knew better than to let my guard down. Peterson wasn't the type to retreat. He was regrouping. And soon enough, his next move came, more underhanded and malicious than before. It started subtly, almost unnoticeably, but the signs were there. Trash began appearing at the edge of my driveway. Empty fast food bags, crushed soda cans, crumpled pieces of paper. At first, I dismissed it as careless littering, an unfortunate side effect of living in a neighborhood with foot traffic. But then the garbage increased, piling up in small, deliberate mounds as if someone was going out of their way to ensure my property looked neglected. I installed additional security cameras, adjusting their angles to capture a wider view, and sure enough, I caught him in the act. Under the cover of darkness, Peterson was sneaking over, dumping small bags of trash right at the edge of my driveway, close enough to be an eyesore but not blatant enough to draw immediate suspicion. But that was just the beginning. The next escalation came in the form of noise, constant, grating, unavoidable noise. Late at night, well past the time when any reasonable person would be asleep, he started blasting music from his backyard. Not just music, but the worst kind of screeching, distorted static, as if he had found the most unpleasant sounds possible and decided to weaponize them. The vibrations rattled my windows, the dissonance seeping into my house like an invading force. I tried to drown it out, but it was relentless. Some nights, it was music. Other nights, it was sudden bursts of loud, obnoxious hammering, as if he was working on some non-existent home project at midnight. It wasn't enough to justify a noise complaint. He was careful about that, keeping the disruptions just within legal limits. But it was enough to make my life miserable. He wanted me to snap, to lose my temper, to lash out so he could play the victim. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I turned his tactics against him. I compiled every single piece of evidence I had. Videos of him dumping trash, footage of him loitering near my property, timestamps of every noise disturbance. I documented it all, creating a file so thorough and irrefutable that even the most indifferent authorities couldn't ignore it. Then I took it straight to the Homeowners Association. Normally, I despise dealing with the HOA, but for once, they were on my side. The board was already aware of Peterson's history of causing problems, and with my overwhelming evidence, they had no choice but to act. Within days, he was slapped with multiple fines for harassment, property defacement, and noise violations. But I wasn't done yet. With the official backing of the HOA, I filed a formal complaint with the city, escalating my case beyond just neighborhood disputes. Peterson had crossed too many lines, and I was going to make sure he paid the price. The next time a random car appeared in my driveway, I didn't just tow it. I had it impounded. This time, there was no audience to bail him out, no sympathetic neighbors willing to entertain his lies. His reputation was crumbling, his control slipping through his fingers like sand. And then, just when I thought I had him backed into a corner, he made his final, desperate play. One evening, I stepped outside to find something new. An official-looking sign staked into the ground at the very edge of my property. It read, "Community parking, open to residents." My stomach twisted as I approached, examining it closely. The wording was just vague enough to seem legitimate, the formatting designed to mimic actual city signs. But it was a fake, another one of Peterson's pathetic attempts to manipulate perception. I pulled it out of the ground, yanking the metal pole free with one hard tug, and as I turned around, I saw him standing in his yard, watching me. His smirk was gone, replaced by barely contained fury, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had played every trick, pulled every stunt, but I wasn't budging. He had lost. And deep down, he knew it. But I wasn't done yet. If he thought a fake sign was going to intimidate me, he had another thing coming. I was going to ensure that this entire stunt cost him dearly. He had started this war, but I was going to be the one to end it. Peterson's frustration was palpable. The power he once held over the neighborhood, the manipulation and lies that had once gone unchallenged, were unraveling before his eyes. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his pettiness, as if sheer persistence could somehow make his delusions a reality. After I removed his fake sign, he took his harassment to the next level. I woke up the next morning to find that my driveway had been vandalized, thick, white chalk lines dividing it into sections, with hastily scrawled labels that read "community parking" in large, looping letters. He had even gone as far as drawing arrows pointing to my garage, as if directing strangers where to go. It was an absurd, almost childish act, but it infuriated me nonetheless. I took out my hose and washed away the markings, but the message was clear. He wasn't giving up, and I knew that as long as he had even an ounce of influence, he would keep pushing his fabricated narrative until someone believed him. But what Peterson failed to realize was that I had reached my breaking point. I wasn't just going to remove the chalk or tow another car. I was going to make sure he never tried anything like this again. I spent the next few days quietly working behind the scenes, pulling every legal resource I could. The evidence I had gathered, the complaints I had filed, and the growing number of neighbors turning against him were all coming together like pieces of a well-planned trap. I requested an official property survey from the city, ensuring that every single inch of my land was properly documented and indisputable. I compiled the security footage of him trespassing, the fabricated notices, the noise complaints, and the vandalism, forming an airtight case against him. And then, I made the final move. I contacted a lawyer. With all the proof in my hands, I filed a formal cease and desist order against Peterson, citing harassment, defamation, and property interference. When he received the legal notice, his reaction was predictable. He stormed over to my property, seething with rage, waving the papers in the air like they were some kind of joke. But this time, I didn't engage. I didn't give him the satisfaction of an argument or the chance to twist the situation into another fabricated claim of injustice. Instead, I let the law do the talking. The cease and desist was just the beginning. The fines from the HOA were piling up, his reputation in the neighborhood was in shambles, and now, with legal action looming over him, his options were dwindling fast. The next escalation was inevitable, but even I wasn't prepared for how desperate he would become. Late one evening, I heard a strange sound outside, Muffled footsteps, the crunch of gravel, the faint rustling of something being dragged across the pavement. My security cameras caught everything. Peterson, in a final, reckless act of defiance, had tried to move one of his old, broken-down cars onto my driveway, pushing it inch by inch as if he could physically force his claim into reality. It was almost laughable, a ridiculous sight of a grown man resorting to such lengths just to prove a point he had already lost. But laughter wasn't what I felt. I felt a deep, simmering anger, the kind that only comes from being pushed to the absolute limit. I didn't wait. I called the police. When they arrived, I showed them the footage, the legal documents, and the ongoing case against him. There was no more room for arguments, no fabricated city policies to hide behind, no excuses left to make. The officers took one look at the situation and immediately intervened. Peterson, for all his bravado, suddenly found himself facing real consequences. The trespassing charges were officially documented, and with the ongoing harassment complaints, he was warned that any further incidents would result in immediate legal action. But the true blow came when they informed him that his fake notices and signs, his repeated lies about community property, could be classified as fraud. His face paled at the word. He had spent so long bending reality to suit his narrative, so long manipulating others into believing his ridiculous claims, that he had never considered what would happen if the law actually turned against him. And just like that, the fight was over. The next morning, my driveway was finally empty. No cars, no trash, no fake signs. The silence was almost unsettling, the absence of his constant interference making it feel like a weight had been lifted from my home. But I knew better than to assume he had learned his lesson. He wasn't the type to admit defeat outright. Instead, he slinked away, his presence still lurking in the background, but his influence shattered beyond repair. The neighborhood had seen the truth, the law had spoken, and there was nothing left for him to twist or manipulate. He had lost, and he knew it. But even as I savored the victory, I had a feeling this wasn't the last time I would have to deal with him. People like Peterson never truly go away. They just wait for the next opportunity to strike. For the first time in weeks, my driveway remained empty, untouched, exactly as it should have been from the start. But even as I enjoyed the quiet victory, I remained cautious. Peterson had built his influence on deception and persistence, and I knew better than to assume he would simply accept defeat. The weight of legal consequences had forced him into retreat, but I had a feeling his bitterness was festering beneath the surface. Sure enough, it wasn't long before I noticed subtle shifts in his behavior. He avoided eye contact whenever we crossed paths, no longer strutting around with his usual arrogance. His house, once a hub of activity with random guests parking in my driveway, now sat eerily quiet. He had become a ghost in the very neighborhood he once tried to control, and that should have been enough to satisfy me. But I wasn't the only one he had wronged. His influence had spread far beyond my property, twisting the perceptions of others, causing unnecessary divisions and tension within the community. And now, with the truth out in the open, those who had once sided with him were turning their backs, distancing themselves from the man who had made a fool of himself. The final blow came not from me, but from the very HOA he had tried to manipulate. While I had been dealing with his harassment firsthand, the association had begun investigating him for other complaints, ones that predated my conflict with him. Unpaid fines, unauthorized modifications to his property, and even a history of fraudulent claims regarding neighborhood rules. His paper-thin credibility had collapsed entirely. The board issued him a final warning, an ultimatum that left him with two choices: comply or sell his house and leave. He must have known he had no real options left because, within days, a "for sale" sign appeared on his lawn. I felt no sympathy. He had spent months waging war against me, attempting to steal what wasn't his, and now he was reaping the consequences of his own arrogance. It was poetic justice. But Peterson wasn't one to disappear quietly. The night before his official move-out date, I heard the sound of tires skidding outside my house, followed by a loud crash. Rushing outside, I found my newly installed parking barrier bent and dented, as if someone had deliberately rammed into it. My security cameras captured everything. The reckless, desperate final act of a man who couldn't stand losing. But it didn't matter. The footage was added to the already extensive record of his actions, another nail in the coffin of his reputation. When I confronted him the next day, standing on his porch as he loaded the last of his belongings into a moving truck, he didn't say a word. His face was a mask of barely contained resentment, his lips pressed into a thin line. There was no grand confrontation, no final attempt to justify himself, just silence. And then he was gone. With Peterson out of the picture, peace returned to my home, but the ordeal had changed me. I had never imagined that something as simple as a driveway could spark such an exhausting, drawn-out battle. But more than that, I had learned just how far entitlement could push a person, how relentless someone could become when they believed the world owed them something. It wasn't just about property. It was about control, about manipulation, about the lengths people would go to in order to bend reality to fit their own selfish desires. I had fought back, not just with words but with action, and in the end, I had won. But victory didn't come without scars. Every time I stepped outside, I was reminded of how easily something I had taken for granted had almost been taken from me. As the days passed, the neighborhood returned to normal. The new owners of Peterson's house moved in, a quiet family with no interest in causing trouble. The tension that had once poisoned the air faded, replaced with a newfound sense of clarity. My security cameras remained in place, my parking barriers stronger than before, and my determination to protect what was mine unshaken. I had faced down entitlement and deceit, and I had come out on top. The battle for my driveway was over, but the lesson it left behind would stay with me forever. Some people believe they can take whatever they want simply because no one has stopped them before. But I had proven that, sometimes, standing your ground isn't just a choice, it's a necessity.